Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. At the start of the year, I reported to you that, as did many other Catholic commentators, that the U.S. government decided that it needed to start keeping an eye on traditional Catholics. And they defined traditional Catholics essentially as anybody who objected to the current state of things in the Church. They noted in some of the initial documents that they were keeping an eye on the FSSP in the Washington, D.C. area, and of course the SSPX in the Washington, D.C. area, but hinted that this program reached far more homes and parishes than merely those two groups in the broader Richmond, Virginia area. And the story kind of came and went. Well, yesterday we had a huge development in the story. Representative Jim Jordan of the House of Representatives and the party controlling the House of Representatives issued a letter to the head of the FBI asking for unredacted, uncensored documents. I have that letter here for you in full. Today's video will be relatively short compared to some of the other ones that I've made this week, and that's fine. Brevity is sometimes the best. The letter is enlightening, and I will give you some thoughts on it afterwards because, as it turns out, the FBI had been really lying about quite a lot, and the oversight of the FBI is now, well, really not happy with all of this. And I want you to really think about this question that I have for you as I go over this, and I'll interject a couple times throughout the course of the letter. What should be done to federal agencies that nakedly violate the Constitution? And I don't mean an accidental violation of some Supreme Court ruling about how, federal powers are supposed to work in some arcane thing. I mean like blatant things. What should happen to them? There is a debate among some of the people on the harder part of the right that says that the FBI as it stands should be essentially disbanded. And maybe a new agency created, or virtually everything that it does spun off to other federal law enforcement agencies, because the argument could be made that it's a redundant organization, that there are other policing agencies that do the work that the FBI do, and that they could take over for the FBI since that organization was founded to fight a problem that existed 100 years ago but doesn't really exist anymore, not to the same scope anyway. Why don't you think about that as we dive into this letter? Addressed to the Honorable Christopher Wray, Director of the FBI. Dear Director Wray, the Committee on the Judiciary is conducting oversight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's handling of domestic VE investigations against Catholic Americans. What a way to describe us. And its effect on protected First Amendment activity. Based on the limited information produced by the FBI to the committee, we now know that the FBI relied on at least one undercover agent to produce its analysis, and that the FBI proposed that its agents engage in outreach to Catholic parishes to develop sources among the clergy and church leadership to inform on Americans practicing their faith. This shocking information reinforces our need for all responsive documents, and the committee is issuing a subpoena to you to compel your full cooperation. We have repeatedly sought information from the FBI relating to a January 23, 2023 document generated by the Richmond Field Office entitled Interest of Fleshly or Ethnically Motivated VE in Radical Traditional Catholic Ideology. Almost certainly presents a new mitigation opportunities. See, also known as the FBI's Richmond document. In this document, the FBI purported to categorize Catholic Americans based on theological distinctions and relied on a Southern advocacy group to suggest that certain kinds of Catholic Americans may be bad people. On February 16, 2023, we first wrote to you requesting documents and information to inform our oversight. After receiving no response, we reiterated our outstanding requests in a subsequent letter dated March 20, 2023. After March 23, 2023, we received a substandard and partial response consisting of only 18 pages, many with significant redactions of, quote, personally identifiable information or, quote, specific non-public information about FBI investigations, sources, and methods. That prevents the committee from fully assessing the content and context of the documents and obtaining information requested from the Bureau. The limited information that was provided from the committee makes clear that we must possess all responsive material without redactions. From this selective production, we know that the FBI, relying on information derived from at least one undercover employee, sought to use local religious organizations as, quote, new avenues for tripwire and source development. For example, in a section of the document entitled Opportunities, the FBI wrote, quote, in addition to redaction, engage in outreach to the leadership of other Society of St. Pius X chapels in the FBI Richmond area of responsibility to sensitize these congregations to the warning signs of radicalization and to enlist their assistance to serve as suspicious activity tripwires, end quote. Just a point of reference here, this means that they were trying to recruit local SSPX mass goers to essentially spy on their neighbors. Let's continue. The FBI similarly noted 2 other opportunities to engage in outreach with religious institutions in the Richmond area, citing a desire, quote, to sensitize the congregation to the warning signs of radicalization and enlist their assistance to serve as suspicious activity tripwires. This outreach plan even including contacting so-called, quote, mainline Catholic parishes and the local, quote, diocesan leadership. The FBI also expressed an interest in, quote, leveraging existing sources and or initiating Type 5 assessments to develop new sources with the placement and access to report on suspicious activity. That means setting up more monitoring of everyday, regular Catholics who happen to have a belief in the church as it was before a few decades ago. Continuing. The information is outrageous and only reinforces the committee's need for all FBI material responsive to our request. The documents produced to date show how the FBI sought to enlist Catholic houses of worship as potential sources to monitor and report on their parishioners. Americans attend church to worship and congregate for their spiritual and personal betterment. They must be free to exercise their fundamental First Amendment rights without worrying that the FBI may have planted so-called tripwire sources or other informants in their houses of worship. Although the FBI claims to have, quote, numerous and, quote, rigorous policies to protect First Amendment rights, the FBI Richmond document plainly undercuts these assertions. The document itself shows that its contents, including its proposal to develop sources in Catholic churches, were reviewed and approved by 2 senior intelligence analysts, and even the local Chief Division Counsel. We know from its whistleblowers that the FBI distributed this document to a field office across the country. It is unclear, however, how many FBI employees explored, quote, new avenues for tripwire and source development in Catholic houses of worship across the country as a result of the FBI's Richmond document. In other words, they don't know how widespread this practice is, if it's just limited to the FBI field offices in the DC area, or if this is more broadly spread across the country. My money is that it's more spread more broadly across the country. And I know this because I have had people tell me from various traditional parishes they attend that they had some people who were rather obviously glowed, to use an internet term, briefly attending masses there before suddenly just disappearing. But let's continue with the final part of this. The Supreme Court has recognized that Congress has a, quote, broad and indispensable power to conduct oversight, which, quote, encompasses inquiries into the administration of existing laws, studies of proposed laws, and surveys in our social, economic, or political system for the purpose of enabling Congress to remedy them. Pursuant to the rules of the House of the Representatives, the committee is authorized to conduct oversight of the Justice Department and FBI, including with respect to the agency's use of law enforcement and counter bad things resources, and their policies to protect civil liberties, to inform potential legislative reforms. These potential legislative reforms could include, among other proposals, legislation to prescribe how federal law enforcement entities investigate constitutionally protected activity, legislation to educate federal law enforcement personnel on civil liberty protections, or legislation to prevent the misuse of federal law enforcement and encounter bad things resources in the future. The information we have requests about the FBI's Richmond document is necessary to inform such potential legislation. Accordingly, and in light of your disregard of our earlier voluntary requests, please find attached a subpoena for the requested documents and information. Sincerely, Jim Jordan, Chairman of the Committee. Okay, so, having seen that they are essentially admitting to trying to recruit your neighbors, your friends, fellow parishioners, to keep tabs on their neighbors. Given that they admit that, given that they see this as opportunities for further spying. What should be done to organizations like this? This isn't the kind of thing that, in the popular mind of the American people, should happen in the United States. But if you know anything about history, this isn't exactly the first time this kind of thing has happened. It might be the first time that we know of that it's happened to Catholics, but then again, there have been whispers for many years that this has been going on. But we know now that this is happening. So what should happen to them? Let me know in the comments. And what do you expect to have happen? I know what I expect. Not much. Remember, we have the most devout Catholic ever sitting on the throne of America right now. And he has allegedly gotten the most popular support in history, if you believe that. He waves his rosary around, is photographed at Mass once in a great while, and uses his faith as a cudgel. And we're not allowed to question, because you're a bad American if you question. Welcome to America in the 21st century, folks. Let me know what you think should happen to that agency, and to any other agency participating in this stuff. Let me know what you think will happen. And if you think this is a sign of more bad things to come. I have a feeling we're not done with this FBI story quite yet, that we will hear more as time goes on. More bad news, more signs that our own system has turned against us. We will see this more and more in the coming days, coming months, probably the coming years. Until what? I don't know. Maybe the divine chastisement that looks like it's taking shape in the form of a conflict overseas that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon, is only going to get worse. Maybe that will be what finally brings us all down, and we'll get a new beginning afterwards. But it won't be you and I who stop it, except through our prayers, our penance, and maybe, turning out at those few times where they let us exercise our freedoms, if those are valid anymore. Let me know, though, what you think about this in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot, too. The sources for this are at returntotradition.org, as usual. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.